Hello, everybody. How's it going? Austin Folingo here with jamplay.com. Welcome to Slices of Jazz, Week 8. I know we're all sad, but this is the last week, y'all. I hope you learned a bunch in this series. This is actually going to be a good one because it's kind of a teaser to my next course or series that's coming out. Real quick, let's just review. So, Slices of Jazz, you know, the whole intention of this course was to kind of get your feet wet with playing jazz, learning some chords, 2-5-1 progressions. We started with scales. I talked about a few scales to kind of get you playing over any sort of chord change. Not the only option, but, you know, good ones to get your feet wet. We talked about how to read charts, you know, what does C triangle mean? C major 7, right? Or C MAJ 7, right? There's tons of ways to write stuff. What do we talk about sometimes in just the context of if you're playing, something kind of jazzy and it just says C? You know, we talked about options like C6 chords and, you know, a C6 or a C major 7, you know. Like I said, just things to kind of, you know, get you playing some jazz kind of stuff. What else did we do? We did tags, we did intros and outros, common chord progressions. Kind of as we, you know, moved with the course, we started kind of showing you a bunch of licks and stuff over the chord changes with the scales I showed you from the beginning. So yeah, if you're just tuning in for the first time, welcome. You know, this is a good course. It's cumulative, so feel free to look at the archives and you know, check out all the other ones. I think you'll learn a whole bunch. So yeah, so this is a good one. We're gonna do some light arranging techniques here. So yeah, you have a track to play with as well, and you have it with everything like the example as well as without a melody or anything, so you can do it on your own, or you know, feel free to jam over it, whatever. So we're gonna start actually with the track. So if we could, let's pull up the example. So, like I said, I chose Silent Night because we all know it, and Christmas is right around the corner. But I also, you know, everybody knows this tune so well, so it's like, I think this is an opportunity to kind of, you know, hear it with some fresh chords, you know, some neat little arranging techniques. I also chose it because it's a simple song, right? So it's, you know, we all know it, we've all heard it, we've all played it. I'm going to show you kind of some cool stuff to do with it. So, you know, it looks like a lot of chords up top, but it's really, it's a lot of the same, you know, chords that we've been using this entire course. So like I said, if you feel a little lost or whatever, please, you know, feel free to look at the archives and, you know, get your feet wet with some of these chord changes and such. Okay, so with the track, I'm going to play it a few different ways here in a minute. And the track is drums, bass, rhythm guitar, and then the lead guitar, which is the example, right? So, and those of you that know me, I'm a big fan of, you know, killing a bunch of birds with one stone, if you will. So that's kind of how this was written, right? So the first time I'm going to play this track, it's drums, bass, rhythm guitar, and then the lead guitar with the arranging techniques in it. And what I'm going to show you is that sounds great, but also I'm going to take the rhythm guitar out on the second time, and you'll hear how this, you know, with learning these arranging techniques, how just simple little things like I'm doing in this example just makes it come alive if you're like in a trio setting, right? Because a lot of times, you know, we learn the melody like that, but you know, I'm going to show you how to do it with some chords. We're going to do some different chord substitutions and stuff to kind of make it sound more hip. But that's going to be the second way to do it. And then I'm going to play it by itself, where it, you know, it sounds good as a standalone, you know, solo guitar thing. So here's number one. Like I said, we have the lead guitar, which is the example that you guys are looking at, with the rhythm guitar, the bass, and the drums. there you have it. I also forgot I did this in a bossa nova style. I realized I hadn't really talked about any bossa nova, kind of a Latin style of jazz, made popular by the great Joe Beam. But yeah, so we kind of did it in that style. But okay, so here's the second time around, and this, like I said, is gonna be there's no rhythm guitar. So this is like it, like I said, if you're in a full band setting, like it was just played, it sounds great. But say you don't have a rhythm guitar and it's just bass, drums, and much better than just single lines. Just those touches of chords and bass motion and stuff like that. Knowing different chords. I will say too, you definitely want to have like a chart or something for this, because there's a bunch of ways to play Silent Night, so you always kind of want to make that known. That could lead to a disaster, but if you give them the chart like this with the chords that I have, you'd be good to go. All right, so here's like I said, same track, just no rhythm guitar. Right, so there's example number 2. And like I said, number 3 is just going to be the solo guitar. Now, if you played it solo, you'd probably want to, mess with the tempo a little bit, use some rubato and stuff to kind of, make it a little bit sexier, if you will. Sexy Silent Night. But, for all intents and purposes, right now, check this out. This is just solo guitar. And there you have it. A pretty little arrangement, right? Okay, so like I said, you've got 3 options there, right? And, I always try to, anytime you learn something, just, learning from different angles like that helps a whole lot. So, you got a solo arrangement, you got a trio arrangement, you got a full band arrangement here, right? Okay, so before we get into it, just a couple things, and I get this question a lot. Anything like when I do a bunch of fingerstyle guitar and stuff too. So like Chet Atkins, Tommy Emmanuel, Jerry Reed, and all those guys. If you ever notice, they play in a lot of open keys, and if they're not using open keys, they're using a capo or something, right? Open strings are great on a guitar, right? So like I said, use that to your advantage anytime you come up with a solo arrangement. Even if it's a jazz tune and it's an E flat or something, there's nothing wrong if you're playing by yourself to put it in the other key. I mean, really, learn them in all 12 keys. But like I said, use the open strings to your advantage. I also, anytime I write an arrangement like this or something, I'll always look where my highest and lowest melody note is, because, you don't want to be having to go all the way up here just for a minute. There might be like, say, this tune worked in D or something rather than G. So that, like I said, that's good to know. Also, remember, and this is the whole thing with this, simple is good, guys. At the end of the day, people just want to hear the melody. Now, you can learn all the tricks. I'm not saying not to, or, and if we have some time, I could, at the end show you some of that kind of stuff. But like I said, at the end of the day, people know the melody, they want to hear it. So a couple, these are simple techniques that just work. And like I said, it stands on its own as a trio or, a full band kind of version of it. Okay, so let's kind of get into the arrangement. Like I said, it's already pulled up. Okay, so chord-wise, these are a lot of the same chords that we have been using the entire time. So, like I said, check out the archives if you're a little confused about that or whatever. Everything's, fingered correctly, marked, the correct way and stuff here. But we'll kind of go over it really quick. So, what I'm doing here, and like I said, this is where, like, you gotta love the key, right? So we got a G6 chord, which we've talked about a lot. I'm sure y'all can see me here. Cool. That we've talked about a lot in here, the last 8 weeks or so. So, right? Great chord. You can use a major 7th too. Like I said, I just, I tend to like the G6 sound a little bit better. That's just taste, right? So yeah, like, you're kind of raking the chord, right? There's your melody note, the D, right? Now, remember too, when you do solo arrangement kind of stuff, or arrangements for bands like this or whatever, try to keep your melody up there. Otherwise it gets muddy and it gets lost, right? So we have, like 1, and I'm kind of raking it, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, right? A sus2 there, chose that chord because the melody is B, right? But like I said, the open strings, once again, I'm never going to stop talking about that. But, that is such a simple, way to, an effective way to play the melody for Silent Night. 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3. And I also, my teacher always told me, like, count, tap your foot, all that kind of helps. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, especially like, the upbeat would, or when your foot goes up, it's the upbeat, right, instead of the downbeat. So I don't know, just that kind of stuff does help. But all right, so we have, now I'm using an A sus2, right? There's the melody, it's the B note. Okay, we haven't gone over this, but this is a great chord, right? So there's plenty of ways to play a B minor 7. And here's one of them, right? So 3-finger version. And I use 1, 2, and 3 right there. Like I said, melody's the same there. 1 and 2 and 3. And then back down to A sus2, right? I also, guys, anytime you learn this kind of stuff, try to do it in sections. And you've heard me say this throughout the entire course, but also, there's good ways and bad ways to practice. And, we're playing music, right? So it's like, it's pleasing to our own ears. But if you're really good at the first 4 bars and you're every time you go to, practice, you start with that, don't do that. Start with the next 4 or so. Just treat your time wisely like that. Spend your time wisely. And I think, like I said, you'll see results faster. So just a little side note there. But so we have G6. You could also do this with your fingers. Like I said, I'm just sort of using a pick. A sus2, just like an A, just let go of your second finger. Now B minor 7 like this. Right? Where really that could have just been, it could have just been a G chord, but like I said, I'm using kind of some bass motion in there with these chords to make it more interesting. So that's kind of the arrangement thoughts right there. Like I said, these chords aren't your only option, but I find they work nicely with Silent Night. So, like I said, from the beginning we have 2 and 3, and 2 and 3, and now B minor 7. I love that B minor 7. You just have that open D, which is the flat third of the chord. Right? Okay, and now we have like a D5, right? It's like an octave there, but the D note there. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and D7, right? And now we have a G6-9 with no third, which we went over in some in a previous lesson. Right, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Right, so this is a cool one, and this works really well as a 2/5 kind of thing on its own. Right, so let's see. From bar 5, we have D5 right here. And then G6-9, right? Kind of has some colors in it. That's why I chose it. Now remember this, right? We did this in a bunch of different lessons, right? Great way to play D minor 7. Also, it kind of looks like a G7 sus, right? But it doesn't have the G there. It's just the inner 4 strings. Like I said, the chord's marked there, but that's, remember in the other lessons, a great way to play 2/5, right? And it's also, you're using the guide finger that we talked about a bunch about with your pinky sliding back, and then these two switch, right? So D minor 7, G7. Now what I'm doing here is I'm doing some bass motion too, and like I said, it's all fingered out and everything. I use 3, 2, 1, and then grab G7 like that, right? So we haven't kind of covered that chord, which, you know, the big version of it is this, right? And it's, you know, we were using this a lot. It's just like that, just with your third. Right? Like I said, another way, guys, we've talked about this a bunch, is practicing, right? Try it chromatically. That's like in fourths. A good way to get those kind of licks on your hands. But like I said, that I find myself in any sort of solo jazz guitar sort of arrangement stuff. It works really well. And also, we're not going to get into this too much today. We'll keep moving here. But like I said, take these things, look at them from all angles, make them your own. Arpeggiating stuff like this, I mean, it sounds fantastic. So like, here's the original, right? You know, what if you went... You know, and just think of all the tunes you know or whatever, and put that in different contexts. Or simple's good too. You know, like I said, just... keep going back here, but you know, that's for a great ending as well. It doesn't have to just be the Silent Night solo arrangement lick. So like I said, I just be creative with this stuff, you know, think about that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's another cool technique. I remember when I learned this, I thought it was fantastic. So essentially what's happening from bar 5 through 8, right? We're down to the 5 chord in the tune. Right, and then back to 1. Now here's the thing. If it was very simple, you would stick on the G chord. But we're going to the 4 chord, right? So a cool like arranging technique, you know, just in playing jazz and stuff, especially if you want to solo as well, you can always make like a 2/5 to the chord you're going to, right? So it becomes a 5 minor of the key, which is G, right? But like I said, what I did was it just gives it so much more life, right? And you know, especially as a chordal player too, you know, right? So just kind of a neat little trick, right? And that's all I'm doing there. And then I just kind of put it, you know, I did a little bass motion. Kind of I added the bass motion because I found it necessary. I mean, the bass could have done it. I didn't do it with the track. But I did that because if you're doing solo, you know, arrangements, that's also a perfect place, like I said earlier, to like let it breathe, give it some rubato. So like say you're right here. Right, and they're there. All right, so moving on to bar 9. Now we have a C major 7th. Like I said, this key is just wonderful for Silent Night. So we have C major 7th like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, you can use your fingers too, guys. Right? Now I have a C sharp, right? Like I said, I'm using a sharp 4 just to spice it up arrangement-wise. So we have 1, 2, and 3. You know, E's your melody, right? 2, 3, 4. Now here's the deal, right? This is like a diminished chord that we've learned in the other lessons as well. The trick here is I bar these 4. Because I'm trying to get that high G note, right? Like I said, keep your melodies, you know, in the higher register, otherwise they get muddy. And you could have, look, I could have kept, right? I could have kept C there too. Like I said, I also think, you know, after you learn this, you know, live with it for a while. And you know, you might even like that. You might not like the sharp 4, you know. Like I said, I'm just, for the purposes of showing you these techniques, I'm adding stuff. But it works fine just with C as well. Right? So like I said, just your standard diminished shape like that, right? But it's just that bar that's a little different. And I mean, if you just make your diminished chord, just all you have to do really, I guess sometimes I find myself doing 4 strings right here on the 3rd fret, but you can just do 3 as well. Now here's another thing, guide finger, right? You could go back, but make life easy, right? So, and I just slide up and then grab the chord again. Or you can do it single. I wrote it actually single note, but so. All right, now look, we're just, I could have done. But I just chose a G5. Like I said, sometimes, guys, you don't have to overthink this stuff. Like a G, you know, it works fine. I think I also used it too, like, this is a Christmas song, right? So everybody's so used to, like, the sort of basic, very peaceful, at least that's the way I think of it when I hear these tunes, you know? So sometimes I think it's good to sort of, like, what I'm saying too is, like, Silent Night wasn't written as a jazz tune, right? So sometimes it's nice to just kind of, you know, pay homage to that and just do it. Right, just use a straight G5, and that's what I'm doing there. So, right, now we have a G7 Triad, which is bar 12. And I'm also, I'm kind of like, it's not a harmony in per se because they're together, but, you know, it's kind of got that same, the same vibe as walking down here. And which bar was that? Excuse me. 8, you know, same as 12, right? So like I said, this is also another good version or use of triads, right? So really, you know, like I said, this is a good teaser because the next course that we're gonna do, you're gonna learn lots about the cool little chords and stuff, right? Right, but like I said, they're just inversions of a G7 Triad. So, like I said, the first time I went full chord, and And then, bar 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, diminished thing with the flattening right there. Grab the G note. G5, keeping it simple. G7 triad, right? We got the third, which is the B note, the flat 7, which is the F note, and then the 5th, which is the D note. And then second, first. I think that's how I have it marked. Second, first. Is that what I said? Losing it. Right. Now back to C major 7th again. 2, 3, 4. Same move here. Back to G5. Right? Now look, this works too, right? Just a double stop or, thirds. Also that's good like if you want to harmonize melodies or something. And also I'll say something about that. Learn all your the thirds, all those sort of devices, right? And the reason why is because they help you if you want to do a harmony, right? So like, for instance, let's just use the recording for example. Say I was making this as an actual track to give to grandma, right? So grandma loves jazz, she loves Silent Night, you put them both together, right? So, it goes through once. Let's talk about typical jazz setting, go back to our lesson about form and all that, right? We're going to go through. Then somebody's generally going to take a solo. So next would be solo, and then the last time through, say we're going to play the head again, right? Or the melody, also known as the head. You can keep this exact arrangement on the first time through. The second, you have the solo. The third time through, you have the melody again, right? And then we can tag it, right? Like we've been learning and all this stuff. You can use all the scale choices I showed you in the other lessons, which we're going to get to here in a minute with this arrangement as well. But by knowing, like seeing all those thirds and stuff everywhere on the neck, it makes it really easy to harmonize, right? Because you could see the third below or above it or whatever, right? So like I said, use that kind of stuff to your advantage. Right, silent night, holy, right? You got a harmony there. So like I said, it's I didn't do much there, but it works. All right, now we're moving into D7th, so we're on the 17th bar, I think. Is that what that says? Yeah. And that's just this simple, right? I mean, essentially it is a triad again, like I used earlier. I'm using the open D. And like I said, sometimes just having a plan, like I mentioned in the beginning, is key. Like, before I wrote this, I was like, all right, Silent Night, I can get my point across. What key? Oh, okay, well, super simple, right? So anyways, yeah, so we got D7 like that. We got our 5th, 3rd, flat 7, and then the root there. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is sleeping heaven. All right, now this is cool, right? This is the use of the diminished chord. So what I did here harmonically, and you kind of hear, you hear in a lot of types of music, but I mean, country comes to mind too, but you'll hear like sometimes you'll see that like diminished chord or something, right? Before like a 6 minor, so you have a 5. Happens in, like I said, it's not just a jazz thing or anything. And what I'm doing there is really, and we've talked about this in previous lessons, so like I said, if for sake of time, we don't, I can't talk too much about this, but if you're curious, please go back and it's better explained. But we have a 5 chord, and then what I'm doing is essentially this is a 3 chord. So we have a 5 down, then to a 6 minor. Now the thing is if you remember from my other lessons, we're in the key of G, right? So secondary dominants are anything that aren't diatonic in the scale, right? We went over that. So this is a secondary dominant key in the key of G, and it's a 3 chord. So if you remember what I said with 3 chords, 6 chords, and 7th chords, major, dominant, flat 7, they tend to have the scale I told you guys, to try and use was the Spanish Phrygian scale, right? And that's what I would use over this. Now the thing is with a chord like that, if you don't play the root, so if we're here, B7, and just use the flat 9 instead, which is the C note, but then play the arpeggio. I think we talked about this last lesson quite a bit. It gives you that diminished sound. I'm adding notes there, but it's a cool sound, right? And that's kind of a cool little trick. And I mentioned in the last lesson, like a lot of times diminished chords tend to be a 3, a 6, or a 7th chord to the parent key, meaning we're in G, so this is a B, which is the 3. So you can kind of add those little, diminished, tricks. And then on a guitar, they're really nice because, they're stacked minor thirds, right? And on a guitar, you can move them every minor third or every 3 frets. Right? So, like I said, it works great on a guitar. But that's kind of what's going on here, right? So I would call it a B7 flat 9, which is the 3 chord, with the A in the bass, right? Which is the flat 7th of the chord. And then it goes down B7 flat 9 with the F sharp in the bass, which is the 5th, and then the D sharp, which is the 3rd. So what's going on there, just to play bars 17 and 18, we have like this, right? 2. Like I said, it works great, and it kind of gives your ear that diminished sound, and that is a diminished chord. That's totally true. But like I said, I don't really think about it like that. And if you go back to the other lessons, like I mentioned, I don't know, it makes it a little bit easier in my head. So also, I meant to mention this before, but also like you can also kind of sub a diminished chord generally for like a 6 of the key, right? So we're talking about the key of G. In the key of G, the 6 is the E note. The 7th, the major 7th, is the F sharp note. 1 is G, and 2 is A. You can always, like, that's kind of a neat little arranging technique. And that's sort of what I'm getting at there. But I use the 3 chord kind of to, with the arrangement of the chords, right? But look, there's your A note, there's your F sharp, there's your 9 or your 2, right? A in the key of G, and then there's your major 7th right there. So like I said, take another tune, try it. It's a neat little trick. But essentially, like I said, that's what's going on right there. So we have sleep. Now we'd have just a simple E minor 7, or really just an E minor like this, right? Now here's the thing, right? When I wrote this, I also thought about going up here. So the thing is I'm just going to use the guide finger again, like I said, to make it easier. And trust me, like, when you practice too, you should use a metronome, because the metronome doesn't lie. And a lot of times, when you practice on your own, you tend to skip beats and stuff, right? So the thing is then when you go into performance mode, and we've all been there, right? Where it's like we've learned something, we learn a blues, and then it comes time to jam with a track or with live people, and it's like, well, man, I keep missing. I've been working on this forever. Like I said, that's why using a metronome and stuff really helps, because it keeps you really honest, right? And like I said, so for E minor, you know, I chose right there. Why? Because the next chord is a 2 chord, which is very lovely for Silent Night. I'm very proud of that moment right there. But, you know, E minor 7 like that. Like I said, the fingerings are marked. It's simple, just from 4 down. And then we have that nice A9 on top, right? There's so many ways you can do it. I mean, you can do like a major 7 like that. That'd be just with a 4 chord. But I chose to go to a 2. So all together we have sleep. And going back to, you know, scale-wise, 2 chords, Lydian scale. Right, for solo purposes. But. So you have an A9 like that. And then, guys, I just kept it super simple, and I just played the straight line at the end. But like I said, you can harmonize it, you know. You can do whatever. Another way, too, I didn't really mention this, but it's another thing, like tenths or sixths. Those are really nice for harmonies as well. So yeah, there's our whole arrangement. So like I said, those are some of the techniques. If you look at this, it like I said, it's not rocket science. It's not that bad. But doing this kind of stuff just a little bit goes a long way, right? All right, so here I'll play it really quick, just solo again, so we can get the whole thing in our head. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Bar 5, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Bar 9. Right? Like I said, it works, right? So that's pretty much it. You know, some final words here. Like I said, when I wrote this, if you really look at it too, it's like we have a mix of triads, of jazz chords, right? Melodies always on top. Single lines, you know, a little bit of thirds. That's really all you need. You know, got the cool kind of diminished trick in there. We have the minor 2/5, right to the 4 chord. Like I said, it goes a long way, right? So like, take another simple Christmas tune, and I challenge you to do that, you know, or take this and then just completely rewrite it, you know, using some of the techniques on different chords, for yourself. You know, and like I said, it's just so much better. Like, look, like going back to the track, if we just played single, you know, that works great as well, right? But you know, when you're in a trio setting, and that's kind of how I started learning this stuff, that and being taught it as well. But, you know, it's nice when you can beef everything up with just like kind of these simple techniques, and especially the filler stuff too, because, you know, you listen to the Joe Pass and stuff, and he's so great at doing all that, where it's like he'll play the melody and then it's, you know, all that stuff. And I mean, it just, like I said, it makes it sound so much more hip. So yeah, well guys, I hope you really enjoyed this course. Like I said, it's all archived, so if you're brand new here or whatever, welcome. But, you know, feel free to go back and check everything else out. Now I'm gonna just leave it open for some Q&A. So yeah, let's start that. But hope you enjoyed the arrangement for sure. All right. Hello, everybody. Okay, we got some questions here. Garfunkel asks, what would be your process if you wanted to transpose this to a different key? Great question. Well, so like I said in the beginning of the lesson, anything solo guitar oriented, open strings are your friends, right? So I would probably start there, like I said, you know, throughout the lesson as well, like you know, it already works really nicely with that. So like I said, I mean, anything open string is great. But, you know, like one good way just that comes to mind of like thinking about that starting wise is if you could just keep like the same set of strings with shapes, that could help. So like you're gonna have to alter some things, right? But you can go right. Now, like I said, I moved to the key of C right there, right? So it's not quite as you don't really have the open options as well. But you can also start another way, just going back, you know, is you could just start by like starting with like a whole step up. Right? So that's, like I said, another way to do it. You know, anytime you're going to be transposing it, you're definitely you're going to want to you put some time into it, right? So I'm just going to the question again, just to be as thorough as possible. Yeah, I mean, it's stuff, you know, when you're playing chords with melody, and the more you do it in time, you're definitely gonna, things are gonna get easier. You know, it's kind of like looking at real book charts sometimes, like, especially if it's in a super guitar-friendly key. You know, if your top melody note, say you're in E flat or something, right? You know, if it's a G, you kind of get to know those shapes. And like I said, guys, you know, I also said this one was kind of a teaser to the new course, but check that out because we're going to do a lot of that kind of stuff in the next course, and I think that'll really help you get a grasp. And like for me, that totally helped, like just knowing all my different shapes of chords, drop twos, triads, all that kind of stuff, because, you know, it's like if you're in E flat, you know that G is the third of that chord, right? So you could drop it right there. But like I said, yeah, I mean, some of this stuff, it's definitely going to take some preparation. You know, you'd have to think about it. I mean, really, like I said, I'd chosen G, so I'm thinking about it right now at this very moment. But, you know, like I said, always, you know, from watch your melody from where you start to as high as you go. You know, you want to make it accessible and easy enough. Open strings always make it, you know, a lot better. Writing it out, like I mentioned that as well, that helps a ton. Just like kind of being able to, you know, see something on paper, whether it's a tab or not. And if you can't do that too, just being slow and counting, like I said too, like all that kind of stuff. I don't know, it could kind of simplify in a way, right? Because sometimes you listen to this stuff, like I mentioned too, and it seems, you know, a lot tougher than it is, you know, when really if you just take it bar by bar, slow it down, that can help a lot. So let's see, I hope that answered your question. Yeah, like I said, definitely work it out. You know, be smart about the key, your fingerings, all that, you know, where as high as your melody goes. And sometimes too with keys as well, I will say you kind of want to think, like E is fine. But the thing is with E too, the melody's kind of, like I said, it's nicer if you can get on strings 1 and 2 rather than going lower, because it kind of gets muddy, you know. So, like I said, use your discretion. Open keys are great. Doesn't have to be open keys, but you know, like I said, all that kind of goes, you know, a long way, especially with, you know, the solo guitar kind of method too. Okay, Eyes Without a Face. We have, you said the metronome keeps you honest. Doesn't the backing track also? Yes, it does, for sure. Yeah. And like I said, with that backing track, you know, guys, you have 4 different options that I gave y'all. And, you know, listen to them, you know, learn the arrangement yourself. Also, like, but then, yeah, also use it as a jam track, which, okay, now my next question is being answered here. So D Water says, what scales would you use when improvising on this? Okay, so let's go back, and like I said, highly recommend going back to the archived material because we go over all that. I did talk about that in the lesson, but, you know, essentially, you know, I'm always going to think back to the parent key. So we're in the key of G, right? So that's my number 1 scale. You know, this whole course series, I kind of, we talked about a few different scales to use, but I also sort of geared it on positions, if you remember, like on every lesson, where, you know, a great place to start is in 2nd position. And then, you know, what I would recommend doing is like take, you know, the chart, right, print it out, go back to, you know, lesson 1. I mean, we just don't have enough time right now to talk about all that, but, and look over it. So, you know, like if we're starting here real quick, let me just pull up the chart again. Okay, right? So first things first, look at the key signature. We're in the key of G, right? So we have G6, you know, A sus, A minor-ish kind of vibe, B minor, A, and then you have a D, right? That's all G scale. Now the thing is like, you know, does it help to know the entire fretboard via the, you know, I would recommend the Cage system, absolutely. Does it help to know your arpeggios? B minor 7 when you get there. You know, that's also a really good way to start by learning it. It's just with some cool rhythm, you can, sorry, I'm just looking at the other, let me get through this question and we'll move on to the next. Right, so like, boom, boom. Like just using arpeggios like that, you can hear the chords moving, right? G, A minor, B minor, A, D. Now that's not the most musical thing in the world, right? But what it does is it really helps you learn. And way, your neck, just the area right there, but it gets you used to that kind of stuff where the listener sort of knows where you're at, right? So like I said, go back and look at that. I mean, a lot of this it's a simple tune, right? I mean, I threw some neat little tricks in there, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of G scale, but, knowing your neck, knowing your arpeggios and everything, avoid tones, right? Generally notes that need to be passed through fairly quickly, rhythmically, as well as they sometimes tend to, be the note where you have a minor second interval where, if you're sitting on one note and then the other one, it's not necessarily wrong, but there can be a rub like that sometimes, right? That could kind of cause tension to the ear. Okay, now I'm going to move this question into the other question. Big Jim asks, can you talk one more time about when it's a good idea to use diminished chords? Yes. Okay, so I don't really think... Some people would say, well, there's your diminished chord. You can use a half whole diminished or a whole half, right? And that can work. But I always go back, kind of like I said earlier, to the parent key. I always tend to view things based on what key the tune is in. Now, do key changes happen and stuff? Sure. But if you go back to lesson, to week 1 of this course, I always lay it out from, okay, we're in this key, and here's your options, right? I find that the easiest way to do it. And then, if you could just take a chord and its function, and like I usually generally use, like in the key of G, G is 1, right? So like in this tune, right, a couple of the curveballs are the C sharp minor that comes first. Right? Okay, so it is a diminished chord, and you can use one of those diminished scales, sure. But if you remember in lesson 1, when I go back, I talk about a 3, a 6, or a 7 secondary dominant chord, right? So generally in the key of G, a 3 would be a B minor, right? And that happens in the beginning of this tune. And then you can play B minor, or a G scale over that. And that's what I mean by avoid tones too, is like sometimes that can get a little hairy because the C note, it's in there, right? And a 3 minor chord is kind of, it's not the most stable of them all, right? Because of that note, right? It's not wrong, but it's something you would do in passing because a C note is a half step away from a B note. And if you sit on that when the B minor comes, it can get a little hairy, right? But just knowing that, oh, I am in a B minor chord, I can still play a G scale. You can totally do it fine, and it works. And like that's why I kind of always try to think like chord to scale relationship like that, because it's like I just find it easier being like in knowing certain chords. Expanding upon that is what happens when it's a secondary dominant, right? In the diatonic progression where you can just use a straight up major scale over it, right? So in this case, we have a B7, and then we also have that C sharp, right? The C sharp diminished, right? Now, in the lesson, I said that those are generally 3, 6, or 7s in disguise. And how do you find their disguises? Well, generally based on one of the notes in the scale. And like for me, and this happens in a ton of tunes, a ton of chord progressions, I find that, right, like a sharp 4 diminished, a lot of times, right, or like, is a 7th chord, meaning an F sharp 7, right? And then if you go back, that's where you would put the F sharp Spanish Phrygian, which is the way I learned it, right? Which is this scale. And the thing about that is, right, is it's a little bit easier harmony to understand than sort of the diminished thing. Because you can kind of just put it to a secondary dominant chord rather than just being this crazy diminished, just label it as that, right? Rather than like thinking back. And if you look at melodies a lot, the melodies under what you'd play there are generally stuff that's sort of not that out there, right? Harmonically speaking. So like I said, here we go. And you see this all the time too. And I talked about this, like how you hear it in pop music and stuff too, like the 5 to the sharp 5 diminished, 6 minor. That right there, like, you know, there's our D sharp. It's like, maybe that is the 3rd of a B7th chord. And when you get there in the arrangement, if you were to solo over it, right? So, then you're back, you know, E minor, that's just G scale. And then, right, A7, up, a 2 chord. And if you go back to that first lesson like we talked about, a 2 chord generally can take a Lydian scale. I flubbed that a little bit, right? So yeah, you definitely probably want to revisit that lesson, but I mean, just to be really quick and brief about it all. Okay, cool. And just, you know, like really quick, if you just scanning it, and this is the best way to do it, I will say. You know, look at a chart like this, print it out or whatever, and just write what scale to use based on the knowledge that you know from previous lessons, right? So like I said, I mean, you got to know the arpeggios and all that. You got to know some of the jazz language. There's plenty of that throughout the entire course in the archives to go back over. But it's like essentially you have straight up G scale, even the D minor to the G7, that's just going to the C. And, you know, you're on a G7, so you can just use a Mixolydian like we talked about in lesson 1. It doesn't really get hairy, like I said, until C sharp 7th, and that's when you can use an F sharp, right? Because that's the 5th, right? And that's the thing, one more thing I'll say about the diminished chords, is generally it's a dominant 7 in disguise, right? With the flat 9 hiding the 1. But when it's not a flat 9, it's the 3rd, the 5th, or the flat 7th, right? So what that means is like if we took, and I explained that with the B7 too. Remember I said, well, it's diminished, but really it's got the A, you know, the A there, which is the flat 7. Then you have the 3rd, or sorry, the 5th, and then you have the 3rd, right? And then your other option, you know, would be the C note, because there's never a root that changes it. But so yeah, and how you get good at that too is just knowing, you know, taking a diminished chord and looking at it, how it functions from a 3, 6, or 7 point of view, and then just kind of drilling them in your fingers, you know, like, so a good way to do that real quick, and then we got to wrap up, guys. But, you know, if it is a B7th chord, right? Okay, well, what replaces the root of a B7 to make it diminished? The C note. So then we automatically have diminished, right? A C diminished. Then we have a D sharp, an F sharp, and an A, right? And that's no coincidence. That you know, those are the rest of the notes in a B7 flat 9 arpeggio, right? All right, so yeah, I hope that helps. It's time to wrap up here. But yeah, guys, yeah, like you have all the, you know, the materials. I hope you really enjoyed the course. You know, the best way to finish, you know, to get better at it, like I said too, is just go back, you know, use the tracks, use the lines. I was also going to say one more thing too, when improvising on this, just use the track without where it's just bass and drums, and just let your ear guide you. You know, I mean, some of this stuff is natural, and, you know, there's never anything wrong with playing the melody as well, but, you know, just mess around with the G scale, you know, and see what works and what doesn't. And if it doesn't work, slow down and say, hey, okay, well, why is that note not working on this chord? You know, analyze it. And, you know, like when it goes to the B7th chord, it's like, oh, well, you know, an F sharp is a really good option because that's the 5th of the chord, right? So, you know, be intuitive about that kind of stuff. So yeah, all right, well, we're going to wrap up now. But like I said, thanks for all the great questions. Hope you enjoyed it. Check it out in the archives. And looking forward to the next live one with you guys. All right, take care.